In our previous videos, we've been looking at leaders in terms of leading individuals. Now let's start to look at leading teams. But first we need to differentiate between teams and groups. So we have formal groups. These are working groups that are defined by organizational structure. So if we think back to the 6 elements of organizational structure, what were they? We had work specialization, so how much did we divide up the labor and the roles? We had departmentalization, how are we grouping people? We had chain of command, span of control, the level of centralization or decentralization, and then the amount of formalization, how much there was in terms of rules and procedures about what you can and can't do. When we talk about formal groups are part of that departmentalization in your organizational structure. So how are you grouping people together? When you have people work together in terms of their area of specialization, so we have an HR department, a marketing department, that formal group is going to be the marketing team, the marketing group, or the HR group. So they are a group because we have put them together based on that departmentalization. They have designated tasks and roles. So that's a formal group. You also have informal groups. So these are the more social groups that you have within your organization. So who eats lunch with whom? And these occur naturally within the workplace. And so we're differentiating that from a team. Oh, so there's the list we just looked at. We're differentiating that from a team. So a team is when you have 2 or more interacting and independent individuals who work intensely on a specific common goal using their positive synergy, individual and mutual accountability, and complementary skills. Well, what does this mean? When we talk about a group shares information. So we're handing off things back and forth, but we're working and we're accountable individually. Whereas a team has mutual accountability. So we expect when we evaluate the results, we're evaluating the effectiveness of the team, not just the effectiveness of the individual. And the goals are based on collective performance. So we have expectations in terms of the group doing something, the team doing something, versus a work group where people are interacting, but the expectations are individual and the goals are just to share information to facilitate the individual's work. So we want to differentiate between groups and between teams. And when it comes to teams, you can have cross-functional teams, so experts in different fields coming together. You could have a team that's put together to solve a problem. Maybe you have an advisory team. And these teams can meet, of course, for face-to-face or virtually in terms of meeting those expectations, accomplishing those objectives. So what we're focusing on here is teams. And there are different stages of team development, and this is often called Tuckman stages of group development. But the real focus here is on teams. And so this comes from a gentleman named Bruce Tuckman, professor of educational psychology at Ohio State University. And so he's looking at the complexity of groups, the level of conflict, and how well they perform. And so he's developed these stages in terms of what he calls group development. And before we get into those stages, just one other interesting thing about Bruce Tuckman is that he also does research on student procrastination. So he uses college students to look at when and how often do they procrastinate, and he also developed a scale in terms of the level of procrastination. But what Tuckman is known for is Tuckman stages of group development. And so there are, the stages are forming, storming, norming, performing, and adjourning. So as we look at these different stages, we want to look at what is happening in terms of the group. And specifically here, we're looking at teams, right, where we have where we're measuring not just the individual, but we have that mutual accountability and that collective performance element. So we are assessing how well they're meeting their objectives by looking at what the group is able to accomplish, not just the individual, and there's accountability of the members. So we start with forming. So forming is where we bring the team together. We identify individuals who are part of the team. They meet and they start to get to know each other. So we're establishing ground rules. We're defining the purpose of the team. If you are a team leader, then your role in this process is to facilitate those introductions, establish expectations. So what do we want to see from the team? What does it mean for the team to be successful? And providing the big picture in terms of how does this work fit into the overall organization's objectives and what are we hoping to get out of this team's work. Then we have the period called storming. So storming is where the individuals are getting to know each other. They still see themselves as individuals. They're communicating their feelings with each other and kind of feeling each other out, trying to figure out whose role is what within the team. So this is where you can have conflict within your team as we figure out, okay, who's going to take on what different persona or different role within the group, who's going to be in charge. So the storming stage is often seen as a period of intra-group conflict. So if you're the team leader, your role is to encourage the team, help to build trust within the group, and to help resolve some of that intra-group conflict, especially when it comes to personality dynamics, where individuals just don't quite get along and their personalities might conflict. Then we have the norming stage. So the norming stage is where people start to stop seeing themselves as the individuals, start to feel part of the team. They realize that in order to get the work done, they are going to have to accept the viewpoints and ideas of others, and relationships start to develop. If you're the team lead during this process, then your job, your role is to monitor the energy of the team. Are they starting to feel that cohesiveness? Recognizing the individual contributions so that people feel part of the team, and then also recognizing team contributions so people start to see themselves in terms of a team identity. So you're providing feedback, you're facilitating learning opportunities, you're helping to try to develop that tight-knit team as it is. Then we have the stage called performing. So performing is where your team is functioning. It's a more open and trusting atmosphere. The focus is more on flexibility. There's less hierarchy. The team is getting things done, moving towards reaching those goals. And if you're the team lead at this point, your job is just to really get out of the way, step back, and let the team function. You can celebrate successes, encourage the team to continue its work. The last stage of group development is the adjourning phase. So this is where the team project starts to wrap up. So if we think about, let's say that you are making a movie, and so you and your team have been living on site away from normal life as you work on this project, then you recognize that that team needs that period of adjournment to help them deal with change. The fact that we kind of celebrate all the contributions that have been made. We plan for the transition to wrap up the activities, but we also mourn the loss that comes from dissolving the team. So if we're talking about making a movie, right, these are friends and people you've spent 24/7 with for a number of weeks. And so there is a mourning period where you have to say goodbye. And so part of the team leader's role is to deal with that change management, to help the members cope with that change, to reflect and celebrate, and then to close off the project and be able to move on. So when we work tightly together, then this adjourning is even more important. So when it comes to Tuckman's stages of group development, one of the key things he points out is that groups don't always follow these steps in a nice sequential order. It's not always forming, storming, norming, performing, adjourning. Okay, that groups might move around, skip phases, and move back and forth. The other thing to recognize with these stages of group development is that the performing stage isn't always the most important, the ideal phase. When it is a situation that is more complicated, more challenging, maybe it's a high-risk situation, so maybe we're talking about maybe you're in the military and you're an elite squad. Yes, we want you to perform with open and trusting atmosphere, but it takes a while to get there. And so the storming period and that intra-group conflict can be very necessary, can be very important. And you can live in that period longer than, say, in that performing period. So when we look at Tuckman's work, sometimes that high level of conflict is conducive to high performance. And sometimes that performing is not always the preferred stage or where we want to live the longest in a particular project.